My brother's wife kept mocking my single life. I stood up for myself and then it got worse, but... So, I, 33M, have been feeling really conflicted about something that went down with my brother, Tom, 35M, and his wife, Sarah, 34F. I guess I should start by saying that Tom and I have always been close, like best friends close. We grew up in a pretty tight-knit family, and even as adults, we've stayed in touch almost every day. He got married to Sarah about 2 years ago, and while I was super happy for him, things started to get a little weird between me and Sarah. At first, I brushed it off as us just needing time to get to know each other better. She's outgoing and can be really funny, but she has this thing where she'll make jokes or little jabs that don't really sit well with me. A lot of the time, it feels like she's teasing me in a way that's, I don't know, kind of passive-aggressive? She'll say stuff like, "Oh, still single, huh?" with a laugh, or maybe if you didn't work so much, you'd actually have a social life. And yeah, I'm single and I work long hours at a startup, but the way she says it always feels a little off. I've tried not to let it get to me, but it's been building up. A couple of weeks ago, the family got together at my parents' house for Sunday dinner, like we do every month. Things were going fine at first, but then Sarah started in with her jokes again. It was the usual stuff, poking fun at me being single, implying that I should learn a thing or two from Tom and her about relationships. I was already feeling a bit irritated, but I didn't want to make a scene, so I just smiled and kept my mouth shut. Then, halfway through dinner, she turned to my parents and, in this overly dramatic voice, said, "You guys must be worried that he'll never give you grandkids." Everyone laughed, and normally I'd just let it roll off my back, but something about the way she said it this time hit me hard. My parents tried to change the subject, but I could see the awkwardness on their faces. They've never pressured me about kids or marriage, and it felt like Sarah was just trying to stir things up. I don't know what came over me, but I finally snapped. I looked directly at Sarah and said, "You know, not every joke is funny." The table got really quiet. Sarah kind of blinked at me like she didn't understand, so I kept going. "It's not funny when you constantly make these comments about my life. I get it, I'm not married, I don't have kids, but you don't need to keep reminding me every time we see each other." Tom looked shocked, and I could tell I had embarrassed her, but in that moment, I didn't care. I was just so fed up. Sarah didn't say anything right away, but then she laughed, this forced, uncomfortable laugh, and said, "Oh come on, I'm just messing with you. You need to lighten up a bit." That's when Tom jumped in, telling me I was overreacting and that Sarah was just joking, that she didn't mean anything by it. I kind of lost it at that point and said, "Well, maybe it's not funny when you're the one always being laughed at." The rest of dinner was super awkward, and I ended up leaving early. Since then, Tom's been texting me, saying that I overreacted and should apologize to Sarah. I told him I wasn't going to apologize for standing up for myself, but now I'm starting to second-guess everything. Was I too harsh? I mean, maybe I could have handled it better. But at the same time, I feel like she's been crossing a line for a while, and I finally just snapped. Anyway, I haven't spoken to Sarah since the dinner, and things between me and Tom have been pretty tense. My parents are staying out of it, but I can tell they feel caught in the middle. I don't want to cause a rift in the family, but I also don't feel like I should have to apologize for calling her out. Am I the asshole for finally saying something? Should I have just kept quiet and let it go like I usually do? Or do I have a right to be upset? I'm really torn here. After that awkward dinner, things were pretty strained between me and Tom. I could tell he was annoyed with me, even though he was still trying to keep things civil. I'll admit, I was a little surprised at how quickly he came to Sarah's defense. I mean, I get it, she's his wife, and obviously he's going to stand by her, but I thought he'd at least understand why I was upset. It's not like it was the first time she made one of those comments, and I've always just let it slide. A couple of days after the dinner, Tom called me to talk about what happened. He started by saying that he didn't want there to be any bad blood between us and that he hoped we could move on from the situation. I told him that I didn't want things to be weird either, but I also felt like he was ignoring how Sarah's comments have been affecting me. "Look, Tom," I said, "I know she's your wife and you want to defend her, but the stuff she says is hurtful. It might seem like I'm overreacting to you, but when it happens over and over again, it starts to feel like she's targeting me." Tom didn't say anything for a second, and I could tell he was trying to figure out how to respond. "I honestly think you're taking this the wrong way," he finally said. "Sarah's just the type of person who teases the people she cares about. She doesn't mean anything by it. You know how she is." That's when I started to get frustrated. "But that's the problem, Tom. You keep saying she doesn't mean anything by it, but how do you think it feels to be on the receiving end of it? Every time I see her, it's like she's pointing out something wrong with my life, and you guys all just laugh it off. It's not funny to me anymore." He sighed and said, "I get that, but if you're really bothered, why didn't you say something sooner?" Blowing up at dinner wasn't the right way to handle it. I had to stop myself from snapping again. He wasn't wrong, I probably should have spoken up sooner, instead of letting everything boil over the way it did. But at the same time, I didn't feel like it was entirely my fault. Maybe I should have said something earlier, I admitted, but I shouldn't have to constantly defend myself against these jokes. Why can't she just lay off? Tom was quiet for a moment, then he said something that really stuck with me. You know, I don't think she even realizes it bothers you. She thinks you're okay with it because you've never said anything before. Maybe if you talked to her directly, instead of just calling her out in front of everyone, she'd understand. I didn't really know how to respond to that. On one hand, it made sense, Sarah probably had no clue how much her comments were getting to me because I've always just laughed along. But on the other hand, it didn't feel fair that I had to be the one to pull her aside and explain why her behavior was hurtful. Shouldn't she be more aware of how her words might come across? We ended the conversation on a tense note. Tom said he'd talk to Sarah about it, but he also made it clear that he thought I needed to lighten up. That really rubbed me the wrong way. It felt like he was minimizing my feelings, and it hurt to think that he didn't take my side more seriously. I know he loves Sarah, but I didn't expect him to be so dismissive. A few days later, Sarah texted me. It was short and to the point, basically, she wanted to meet up and clear the air. I wasn't sure how I felt about that. Part of me was relieved that she was willing to talk, but another part of me was dreading the conversation. I didn't know if she actually wanted to apologize or if this was just going to turn into her defending herself and making me feel like I was overreacting. We met up at a coffee shop. Right from the start, Sarah seemed kind of defensive. She sat down, gave me this tight smile, and said, "So, Tom told me you're upset with me." I nodded, trying to stay calm. "Yeah, I am. The things you say to me, the jokes, they're hurtful." She raised an eyebrow. "I didn't know you were so sensitive. I'm just messing around, you know? I joke with Tom all the time, and he never gets upset." That's when I realized this conversation wasn't going to go the way I'd hoped. "It's different," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You and Tom are married. You have that dynamic. But when you joke about me being single or not having kids, it feels personal. Like you're pointing out something wrong with my life." She looked genuinely surprised, and for a second, I thought maybe I was getting through to her. But then she shrugged and said, "I guess I didn't realize it bothered you that much. I just figured you could take a joke. Maybe you're being a little too sensitive about it?" And there it was, the same dismissive attitude I'd been dealing with for months. At that point, I realized that I wasn't going to get the apology I was hoping for. Sarah clearly didn't see anything wrong with her behavior, and if anything, she thought I was the one with the problem for not being able to take a joke. I ended up cutting the conversation short, telling her that I wasn't interested in going back and forth over whether I was too sensitive. I just wanted her to understand that her comments were hurtful, and that's all I was asking for her to stop. She agreed, but it felt more like she was just saying what I wanted to hear so we could move on. Now I'm left feeling conflicted. On one hand, I stood up for myself and said what I needed to say. But on the other hand, it feels like nothing really changed. Tom's still acting like I'm overreacting, and Sarah clearly thinks I need to lighten up. I'm not sure where this leaves things between us, and I hate that it's causing tension in the family. Am I just being too sensitive? Should I have handled this differently? After that uncomfortable coffee shop conversation, I thought things would start to die down, but I was wrong. If anything, things got worse. I didn't expect Sarah to fully change overnight, but I had hoped she would at least back off a little. Unfortunately, it seemed like her idea of moving on was pretending that nothing had happened, and that just made things even more awkward. The next Sunday, we had another family dinner at my parents' house, and I seriously debated not going. I didn't want another confrontation with Sarah, and I wasn't sure I could sit there and pretend everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. But at the same time, I didn't want to start avoiding my own family because of this. So, I went, hoping I could just get through the night without any drama. When I got there, things were already off. Tom was acting weird, barely making eye contact with me, and Sarah was being extra polite, which only made it more obvious that she was still upset. Dinner started out pretty quiet, with everyone making small talk, but there was this tension hanging over the table that I'm sure everyone could feel. My mom kept glancing between me and Sarah like she was just waiting for something to happen, but she didn't say anything. About halfway through the meal, my dad, completely oblivious to the weird energy, made some joke about me being a bachelor for life. Normally, I would have laughed it off, but after everything that had been going on, I just wasn't in the mood. I gave a half smile, but I could feel the tension rising inside me. That's when Sarah chimed in. "Well, maybe if he took some advice from us married folks, he wouldn't be single forever," she said with a laugh, glancing at Tom like it was the funniest thing she'd ever said. I felt my stomach drop. Here we go again. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool, but before I could say anything, Tom jumped in. "Oh, come on, Sarah. He's got his own way of doing things," he said, trying to defuse the situation. But there was this weird tone in his voice, like he was trying to cover for her without really addressing what she said. It was the first time he'd said anything even remotely supportive of me since all of this started, but it wasn't enough. I could feel my hands clenching under the table, and I just couldn't let it go this time. "You know, Sarah, I thought we already talked about this," I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could. "I'm tired of being the punchline for every family dinner." The room went silent. My mom and dad exchanged nervous looks, clearly not wanting to get involved, but also sensing that something was about to blow up. Tom sighed and put his fork down, clearly annoyed. "Come on, man. We're just joking around." I turned to him, feeling the frustration bubbling up again. "But it's not just joking around to me. I've told you both that this isn't funny anymore, but it keeps happening. Why can't you respect that?" Sarah, who had been sitting quietly, finally spoke up. "Look, I didn't mean to offend you. I thought we were all just having a good time. But if you're going to keep making everything so serious, maybe you're the one who needs to lighten up." Her voice was calm, but there was this edge to it, like she was tired of having to explain herself. And that's when I realized something. She wasn't going to change. No matter how many times I tried to explain how I felt, she was always going to see me as the one with the problem. In her eyes, I was being too sensitive, overreacting, and making things serious when all she was doing was joking. I pushed my chair back and stood up. "I think I'm done here," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "I'm not going to keep coming to these dinners if it's just going to be like this every time." Everyone at the table froze. My mom looked horrified, and my dad's eyes widened like he couldn't believe what was happening. Tom stood up, too, clearly angry now. "Are you seriously walking out? Over a stupid joke?" "It's not just the joke, Tom," I shot back. "It's the fact that you're not listening to me. I've told you how I feel, and you're still acting like it's no big deal. I can't keep doing this." Without waiting for anyone to respond, I grabbed my jacket and walked out the door. I could hear my mom calling after me, but I didn't stop. I got in my car and drove home, my heart pounding in my chest. As soon as I got home, the anger started to fade, and all that was left was this deep, sinking feeling of guilt. I knew I'd just made things even worse, and now I wasn't sure how, or if, I could fix it. It's been a few days since that dinner, and I haven't heard from Tom. My mom called to check on me, and while she didn't say it outright, I could tell she was hoping I'd apologize and smooth things over. But honestly, I'm not sure if I should. I mean, how much am I supposed to take before I finally stand up for myself? I don't want to lose my relationship with my brother, but at the same time, I feel like he's choosing Sarah over me, and that hurts more than I can explain. So here I am, stuck between wanting to make peace and feeling like I shouldn't have to apologize for standing my ground. Was I wrong to walk out? Should I have stayed and tried to talk things out again? Or am I justified in stepping away from a situation that's been hurting me for a long time? I really don't know what to do at this point. After that conversation with Tom, I felt a little better. Even though things had been tense, it seemed like he was finally starting to understand where I was coming from. But with Sarah, things still felt unresolved. Tom promised to talk to her, but honestly, I wasn't sure what to expect. A few days passed without any word from either of them, which gave me a lot of time to think. Maybe too much time. I kept going back and forth in my head, wondering if I was the one who had blown this whole thing out of proportion. I mean, Sarah wasn't cruel, she just had a sense of humor that rubbed me the wrong way. Could it really be as simple as me being too sensitive? But then again, why should I have to put up with comments that made me feel small? The silence finally broke when I got a text from Tom asking if I could come over to their place for dinner. I was hesitant at first, wondering if this was going to be another awkward encounter where we all tiptoed around the real issue. But Tom said he and Sarah both wanted to talk, so I figured it was worth going. When I arrived, the atmosphere was weirdly calm. Sarah greeted me at the door with a smile that seemed a little forced, but I appreciated the effort. We made small talk while Tom finished setting the table, and for a moment, it felt almost normal. But I knew we weren't just there for dinner. After we ate, Tom cleared his throat and said, "So, Sarah and I talked about everything that happened, and we wanted to get everything out in the open." I tensed up, bracing for whatever was about to come. Sarah sat there, looking a little uncomfortable, but at least she wasn't brushing it off this time. "I didn't realize how much my jokes were bothering you," she said, glancing at Tom before turning back to me. "When Tom told me, I was kind of surprised, because I really didn't mean any harm. But I can see now that it wasn't funny to you, and I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings." There was a moment of silence where I wasn't sure what to say. I wasn't expecting a full apology, especially after how defensive she'd been before. I could tell it wasn't easy for her to admit she'd crossed a line, and for the first time, I felt like she was genuinely trying to understand my perspective. "I appreciate that," I said, carefully choosing my words. I didn't want to blow up at dinner, but it just got to the point where I couldn't take it anymore. "I know you didn't mean anything by it, but it still hurt." Sarah nodded, and I could see her thinking it over. "I get that now. I guess I just figured if you weren't saying anything, it wasn't a big deal. But if I'm being honest, I've also been feeling like you don't really like me. I wasn't sure if you were just putting up with me because of Tom, so I probably tried too hard to joke around and, I don't know, make things less awkward." That caught me off guard. I hadn't realized she felt that way. I never intended to make her feel unwelcome, but looking back, I could see how my frustration with her jokes might have come across that way. Maybe we were both guilty of misunderstanding each other. "I don't dislike you, Sarah," I said, feeling like this was a moment where we could actually make some progress. "I just didn't know how to handle the jokes. But I don't want things to be weird between us. Tom's my brother, and you're important to him, so I want us to get along." Tom chimed in at this point, nodding in agreement. "That's what I've been saying. I don't want you two to feel like you have to walk on eggshells around each other. We're family now." There was a moment where the three of us just sat there, letting the conversation sink in. It felt like, for the first time, we were all on the same page. Sarah didn't seem as defensive, and Tom wasn't brushing off my feelings like before. It was still awkward, but it felt like we were moving in the right direction. After the conversation, things weren't magically perfect, but I did feel a weight lift off my shoulders. I knew it would take time for us to really get past all the tension, but at least we were starting to communicate. Sarah even made a conscious effort to steer clear of any of her usual jokes, which I appreciated more than I could say. It's been a few weeks since that dinner, and things are better. Not perfect, but better. Sarah still slips up every now and then with her humor, but when she does, she catches herself and apologizes. And I've been trying to be more open with her, making an effort to get to know her beyond just being Tom's wife. I think we both realized that neither of us wanted this drama, and we were both just reacting to our own insecurities. As for Tom, he's been really supportive now that he understands where I'm coming from. He's even stepped in a couple of times to change the subject when things started to veer into uncomfortable territory. I can tell he's relieved that we're finally working things out, and that makes me feel like I did the right thing by speaking up, even if it was messy at first. So, yeah, it's been a process, but I feel like we're on a better path now. I'm still not sure if I handled everything the best way, but I'm glad I didn't just keep quiet. If I had, I think the resentment would have only grown, and who knows what that would have done to my relationship with Tom. But now that things are starting to settle, I guess I'm wondering, was I wrong for how I went about this? Should I have handled it differently from the start? I'm glad we're moving forward, but I can't help but feel like I could have avoided some of the drama if I'd just spoken up earlier. Would love to hear if anyone else has been in a similar situation and how you dealt with it. The weeks after that dinner were a mix of relief and uncertainty. Things were better, sure, but I still felt like I was walking a fine line between maintaining the peace and asserting my boundaries. Sarah had made an effort to be more considerate, and I could tell she was trying, but every now and then, there'd still be these moments where she'd slip back into her old habits. One Sunday, we were all at a barbecue at Tom and Sarah's place. It was a pretty casual get-together with just some close friends and family. Everything was going fine, Tom was grilling, people were laughing, and for the most part, I was actually enjoying myself. Sarah and I had even managed to have a couple of decent conversations without any tension. I started thinking maybe we'd finally turned a corner. But then, towards the end of the afternoon, Sarah made a joke that caught me off guard. It wasn't even that bad compared to the ones she used to make. It was something like, "Oh, you should have seen my name back in the day. He was such a player. Now look at him, all domesticated." She laughed, and a few people chuckled along, but I felt that familiar sting. I could tell from the way she said it that she wasn't trying to be mean, but it still rubbed me the wrong way. I had been working so hard to let these kinds of comments slide, but this one hit me differently. It wasn't even about being a player or whatever. Sarah didn't know me back then, so it just felt like she was making assumptions again, like she still didn't really get me. I took a breath, reminding myself that I didn't want to ruin the mood. The old me would have let this build up until I couldn't take it anymore, but after everything that had happened, I knew I had to handle it differently. So, I pulled Sarah aside after everyone had gone back to chatting and said, "Hey, can we talk for a second?" She looked a little surprised but nodded, following me to a quiet corner of the yard. "What's up?" "I know you didn't mean anything by it," I started, keeping my tone as calm as possible, but that comment earlier about me being a player, it bothered me. "I know we've talked about this before, but I just want to remind you that jokes about my personal life still feel uncomfortable, even when they're lighthearted." Her face shifted from confusion to understanding, and she sighed. I didn't even think about it that way. I'm sorry. I really wasn't trying to make you feel bad. I know, I said. And I appreciate that you've been trying. I really do. I just want to make sure we're both on the same page. She nodded, looking a little apologetic. You're right. I need to be more careful. I guess I'm still adjusting, but I don't want to keep upsetting you. I'll work on it. That moment felt different from the previous ones. Maybe it was because I had taken a different approach by pulling her aside instead of calling her out in front of others, or maybe we were both just learning how to navigate this new dynamic. Whatever it was, the tension that usually followed these kinds of conversations wasn't there. It felt like we were finally getting somewhere, like we were actually listening to each other. After that, the rest of the barbecue went smoothly. Sarah and I even joked around a little later, on my terms this time. I could tell she was being more mindful of her words, and it made things easier between us. Tom noticed too, and later that night, he pulled me aside and thanked me for being patient with Sarah. I think he understood now that this wasn't just about me being overly sensitive. It was about respect, and it seemed like we were all finally starting to understand that. Now, I wish I could say that everything has been perfect since then, but life's not that simple. There are still moments where Sarah slips up or where I get a little too defensive, but they're fewer and farther between. The difference now is that we both know how to communicate when things get uncomfortable. Instead of letting the resentment fester, I'm more willing to speak up, and she's more willing to listen. As for Tom and me, our relationship feels stronger now. I think going through all this actually brought us closer in a weird way. He saw that I wasn't just being difficult for the sake of it, and I saw that he really does care about how I feel, even if he didn't always show it in the beginning. The thing is, I'm still not sure if I handled everything perfectly. Maybe if I'd been more direct from the start, we could have avoided all the drama. But at the same time, maybe we needed to go through that mess to get to where we are now. So, here I am, feeling better but still reflecting on everything. I guess I'm asking, did I do the right thing by pulling Sarah aside this time instead of calling her out in front of everyone? Or should I have done that all along? I feel like I'm learning as I go, but sometimes I wonder if I should have figured this out sooner. Would love to hear your thoughts. In the weeks following that barbecue, I felt like things were finally starting to settle into a good place. Sarah and I were getting along better, Tom seemed less stressed, and family gatherings weren't filled with the same tension that had been hanging over us for months. We weren't best friends by any means, but we were civil, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't dread seeing her. But, of course, life isn't that simple. A few weeks ago, my mom called me out of the blue. She sounded a bit anxious, which isn't like her. After a bit of small talk, she got to the point. Your brother's coming over tonight to talk. Apparently, Sarah's still upset about everything that's happened, and she feels like you've never really accepted her into the family. I was stunned. We had been making progress, or so I thought. Mom, we've worked things out. We've been fine lately. Where is this coming from? She sighed. I don't know, honey. But she mentioned something about feeling like you're only being nice to her because of Tom. She thinks you still don't like her. I sat there, not really sure how to respond. Hadn't we moved past this? I mean, I wasn't pretending to like Sarah. I genuinely thought we'd found a better rhythm, and I'd been making an effort to connect with her. But apparently, she didn't see it that way. Later that night, Tom texted me, asking if we could meet up. When we met, it was clear he was stressed. He looked tired, and I could tell that whatever was going on between him and Sarah was weighing on him. Look, man, he started, rubbing the back of his neck. I know things have gotten better between you and Sarah, but she's still feeling. I don't know, like there's this wall between you two. I frowned, feeling a wave of frustration wash over me. I don't get it. We've talked, I've apologized, and I've made a real effort to keep things light. I thought things were improving. They are, Tom said quickly. But she feels like you're still distant. She mentioned that you only hang out with us when it's a family thing, and you never really come around otherwise. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. So, she wants me to come over more? Hang out with you guys? I didn't realize that was a problem. Tom shifted uncomfortably. It's not that. It's just, she wants to feel like you actually want to be part of her life, not just Tom's brother who tolerates her. I took a deep breath, trying to hold back my frustration. Tom, I don't know what else I can do. I've tried to be more open with her, I've made an effort to let go of all the stuff that happened before, but it feels like no matter what I do, it's not enough. I'm not going to be her best friend overnight. He nodded, but I could tell he was torn. I get it, man, I do. And I'm not saying you need to be best friends. But I think she just needs to feel like you accept her as part of the family, not as someone you're forced to be nice to. This was starting to feel exhausting. I had been trying so hard to make things right, but now it felt like I was being asked to go even further, to put on a smile and act like everything was perfect when, deep down, I was still figuring out my own feelings. It wasn't that I didn't like Sarah, but there was still a part of me that struggled with how everything had played out. After a long pause, I finally said, "I don't want to hurt her, Tom. I don't want to keep feeling like I'm the problem. But I can't pretend I'm over everything that quickly. It's going to take time." Tom nodded, looking relieved that I wasn't just shutting down the conversation. "I get that. And I've told her the same thing, that it's going to take time for you guys to fully click. But maybe, I don't know, maybe you could spend a little more time with us outside of family stuff? Just so she feels like you're making an effort." I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to push back and say that I'd already made enough of an effort. But another part of me knew Tom was right. Sarah needed more reassurance, and I wasn't sure if I'd been giving her that. "Okay," I finally said. "I'll come over more. I'll try to be more involved." Tom smiled, clearly relieved. "Thanks, man. It means a lot to me." The next few weeks, I made a point to drop by Tom and Sarah's place more often. It wasn't always easy, sometimes I felt like I was just going through the motions, but I could tell that it was making a difference. Sarah seemed more relaxed around me, and we even started finding some common ground. We talked about random things, work, TV shows, stuff like that, and it felt normal. Like maybe we were finally getting past everything. But despite all of this, there was still this nagging feeling in the back of my mind. I was doing what Tom had asked, but I wasn't sure if I was being genuine. Was I really accepting Sarah as part of the family, or was I just playing along to keep the peace? I didn't know, and it bothered me more than I wanted to admit. One evening, after another dinner at their place, Sarah pulled me aside before I left. "Hey," she said quietly. "I just wanted to say, I've noticed that you've been coming around more, and I appreciate it. I know things were rough for a while, but it means a lot to me that you're trying." I looked at her, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. "Thanks," I finally replied. "I'm trying, Sarah. I really am." She smiled, and for the first time, it felt like we were on the same page. Maybe we weren't best friends, but we were making progress. But as I drove home that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. I was making the effort, yes, but I wasn't sure if it was because I genuinely wanted to or because I felt obligated. Was I being honest with myself, or was I just doing what I thought was expected of me? I guess that's where I'm at now, trying to figure out if I'm really okay with everything or if I'm just playing a role to keep the peace. I don't want to go back to the way things were, but I also don't want to fake my way through this. So, Reddit, I guess my question now is, how do I know if I'm really accepting Sarah, or if I'm just trying to avoid more conflict? Have any of you been in a similar situation where you're not sure if your feelings are genuine or if you're just doing what's expected? I could really use some advice on how to navigate this. After that conversation with Sarah, I couldn't stop thinking about whether my efforts were real or just for show. It felt like I was stuck in this weird in-between where things were better, but I wasn't sure if they were genuinely better. I found myself second-guessing every interaction. Was I being friendly because I wanted to be? Or was I doing it to avoid more drama? About a week after that last dinner, my mom invited all of us over for my dad's birthday. I wasn't sure how it would go since it was going to be the first big family event since all the tension had, kind of, died down. I kept telling myself that I'd be fine, that things had been improving, but part of me was worried something would set everything off again. When I got to my parents' house, Sarah and Tom were already there, helping set up. Sarah greeted me with a smile, and for the first time in a while, it didn't feel forced or awkward. That should have been a good sign, but I still couldn't shake this nagging feeling in the back of my mind that I wasn't being completely honest with myself. I went through the motions, chatting with her and Tom, but it felt like I was performing more than actually engaging. As the night went on, things seemed to be going smoothly, until the topic of family came up. We were sitting around the dinner table when my mom asked Sarah and Tom if they'd thought about having kids anytime soon. It was a harmless question, really, but I could see Sarah shift uncomfortably in her seat. She gave a polite answer about taking things one step at a time, and I noticed Tom didn't say much either. Then my dad, oblivious to the tension, said something like, "Well, I'm sure, my name, will be the next one to settle down and surprise us with grandkids." The table went quiet for a second, and I felt the familiar pressure building in my chest. I smiled awkwardly, trying to brush it off, but I could feel everyone's eyes on me, including Sarah's. And then, out of nowhere, Sarah said, "Oh, I'm sure he's just waiting for the right woman to swoop in and make an honest man out of him." She laughed, but this time it didn't feel like the other times. It wasn't sharp or mean-spirited, it felt more like she was trying to ease the tension. But even though I could tell she wasn't trying to hurt me, I felt a familiar sting. Everyone chuckled awkwardly, and I could see that Sarah was immediately regretting her comment. Before I could say anything, Sarah quickly added, "Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. It was just a dumb joke." I could tell she was trying to smooth things over, and part of me wanted to just let it go. But the other part of me, the part that had been stewing over this for months, felt like I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay. I'd told myself I was doing better, that I was handling things, but in that moment, I realized that I still wasn't over it. The effort I'd been making didn't feel genuine, because deep down, I was still holding on to all the resentment from before. So, instead of letting it slide, I took a deep breath and said, "I know you didn't mean anything by it, Sarah, but honestly, I'd appreciate it if we could just stop making jokes about my personal life." The table went silent again, and I could feel all eyes on me. Sarah blinked, clearly taken aback, but then she nodded. "You're right. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that." I could feel the tension in the room rise, but this time, I wasn't angry. I was just tired. Tired of pretending everything was okay when it wasn't. Tired of trying to force this relationship to work when, deep down, I wasn't sure it ever would. Tom, sensing the awkwardness, quickly changed the subject, and the rest of the dinner went on without any more issues. But after that moment, I felt a shift. Not just in the room, but in myself. It was like I'd finally admitted to myself that things weren't as fixed as I'd hoped. Later that night, when I was helping clean up, Sarah pulled me aside. "I didn't mean to cross a line tonight," she said quietly. "I thought we were in a better place, but I get that maybe I pushed too far." I looked at her, and for the first time in a while, I felt like I could be honest without worrying about hurting her feelings. "We are in a better place," I said slowly. "But I think I've been trying too hard to act like everything's fine when it's still a work in progress. I want things to be good between us, but I don't think we're quite there yet." Sarah nodded, her face softening. "I get that. And I don't want to keep making you feel uncomfortable. I don't know. I want us to get along, but I feel like I keep screwing it up." "I don't think it's just you," I admitted. "I think we've both been trying to figure this out, and it's just going to take time." For the first time, I felt like we were actually on the same page. There wasn't any forced politeness, no pressure to pretend like everything was perfect. It was just an honest acknowledgement that we both had some work to do if we wanted to move forward. That conversation didn't magically fix everything, but it did make me feel like we were finally getting somewhere real. Not just putting on a show for Tom or the family, but actually trying to understand each other. Since then, things have been different. In a good way, though. Sarah and I don't feel as tense around each other anymore, and when we hang out, it feels less like I'm performing and more like I'm just there. It's still not perfect, but at least it feels more honest. I think the biggest lesson I've learned from all of this is that relationships, whether with family, friends, or in-laws, aren't supposed to be easy all the time. It takes effort, sure, but it also takes honesty. For so long, I was trying to fix things by pretending everything was okay, but the truth is, the real progress started when I admitted it wasn't. I'm still working through all of this, and I'm sure there will be more bumps along the way. But for now, I feel like I'm finally on the right path. Not just with Sarah, but with myself. So, I guess my question to you all is, have you ever had a relationship where it felt like you were constantly working at it, and how did you know when things were truly okay? Does it ever feel finished, or is it always a work in progress? Would love to hear your thoughts. After that honest conversation with Sarah, things finally began to fall into place. It wasn't perfect, and it didn't feel like we were suddenly best friends, but for the first time, the air between us didn't feel forced or tense. We both acknowledged that the dynamic was going to be a work in progress, but I think that simple admission, that it wasn't all magically fixed, was what made everything a little easier moving forward. Over the next few months, family gatherings felt different. Sarah stopped making jokes about my personal life completely, which I appreciated more than I probably let on. She was careful not to push any buttons, and I stopped feeling like I had to brace myself whenever she started talking. Slowly, I found myself relaxing around her, something I didn't even realize I hadn't been doing for a long time. Tom noticed too. I think he'd been carrying his own stress about the situation, trying to mediate between his wife and his brother. Now that Sarah and I were on better terms, he seemed lighter, like he could just enjoy having both of us around without worrying about a blow-up. We didn't need constant check-ins anymore, and there wasn't that undercurrent of awkwardness whenever we were all in the same room. It felt like we had finally gotten to a place where we could just be around each other. One weekend, Tom and Sarah invited me over for a game night with a few of their friends. At first, I hesitated. There was still a part of me that wasn't sure if I was ready for a casual hangout like that. But I went, and I'm glad I did. The whole night felt normal. We played cards, had drinks, laughed at dumb inside jokes, Sarah included. I didn't feel like I had to overthink every interaction or worry about how things were coming across. It was probably the most relaxed I'd been around them in a long time. By the end of the night, I realized something that had been gnawing at me throughout this whole ordeal. Sarah and I weren't going to be best friends, and that was okay. I didn't need to force some close relationship just because she was married to my brother. What mattered was that we had found a way to be comfortable around each other, to respect each other. That's all I had really wanted from the beginning. Tom and I even talked about it afterward, and he admitted he was relieved too. I was so worried this was going to end with someone pulling away from the family, he said. But I'm really happy with where we've landed. I nodded, realizing I felt the same way. Yeah, me too. I think we just needed to stop pretending everything had to be perfect. In the end, that's what it boiled down to, accepting that not every relationship, especially one as tricky as the in-law dynamic, needs to fit some ideal mold. We don't have to be super close to get along, and I can respect Sarah's place in the family without feeling like I need to change who I am to fit into some version of what I think that relationship should be. Now, months later, I can honestly say things have settled into a good rhythm. We're no longer walking on eggshells around each other, and there's an ease that wasn't there before. Sarah still has her sharp sense of humor, but she's more thoughtful with it now, and I'm more open to giving her the benefit of the doubt. We've found a middle ground where we can coexist as family without forcing anything that isn't natural. I guess if there's one big takeaway from all of this, it's that relationships, especially within families, don't have to be perfect to work. They just need to be based on mutual respect and honesty. Once we stopped pretending that everything had to be easy and acknowledged that we were both struggling in our own ways, things started to improve. Looking back, I don't regret confronting Sarah at that family dinner months ago. It wasn't pretty, and it led to a lot of awkward and difficult conversations, but it also forced us to address something that had been brewing under the surface for far too long. Without that, I think the resentment would have kept building, and we might have ended up in a place where things couldn't be repaired. Now, I'm in a much better place with both Tom and Sarah. I no longer feel like I'm on the outside looking in at their relationship, and while we're not super close, we've developed a healthy, respectful connection. And that's enough for me. So, Reddit, I guess this is the end of the story. It was a bumpy road, and there were times when I wasn't sure if things would ever get better, but we made it through. If you take anything from this, I hope it's the reminder that it's okay for relationships to be messy sometimes, as long as you're willing to put in the effort to communicate and respect each other. Thanks to everyone who stuck with me through all of this and offered advice. It really helped me keep things in perspective when I felt like I was in over my head.